This is our second look at what was once the lovely borough of Ludwick. And this is a view from 1901. A guy named Fowler did these things. He sent a whole team of people out to make images of various cities and then published them. And you would think this was done from an airplane or a balloon, but it was not. He actually sent guys out on the street and then took it back to his studio and created these views seemingly from the air. Over here, this is a corner of Seton Hill. Up here was Will Stokes' mansion at once upon a time. This, of course, is the mainline works going through. And we'll see a bunch of other things like the old foundry that used to be in Ludwick. There was once a foundry right here. This is Stokes Street. It still exists. And Stokes Street was once the entrance to Seton Hill College. And GU Tower, the railroad tower, one time sat right there. It had been moved from its position that had been over here. There was a planing mill. There was an ice and coal company. There was a meat packing place, a grain distributing place. Over here along Depot Street, there was a whole bunch of things which we'll take a look at. Now, this is the freight station where it now sits. It had originally sat right over around here, but the whole thing had been moved over here. And we are going to move on. This is a shot I did of Ludwick, perhaps in the 1980s. The old storage and transfer building sits there. That's Ludwick Street. Running across here is Depot Street. This is a terrific shot. This is one of Leroy Smeltzer's shots from the 1920s. It was 1922. The Prosperity Special was coming through. Matthias Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia had built a whole bunch of these giant, wonderful machines for the Southern Pacific lines, and they were shipping them out to the southwest of the United States. And they stopped in Ludwick for a photo opportunity. These are great-looking machines, and we owe a debt to Leroy Smeltzer for doing this, and for Glenn Smeltzer, his son, for sharing this. Right around here is where those trains were sitting when they were shot. And what I have the red line around is what was the railroad yard. See, this is the main line, and there were once a whole bunch of railroad tracks that came off of there and went into this area here, which is now totally obliterated as a railroad yard. This is Depot Street right here to get a sense of orientation. This over here is Stokes, and this is Foundry. Now this is looking down Depot Street. Going across is West Otterman, and we're looking down Depot Street toward the tracks. This nice big old building was once the storage and transfer building. This is 1909. This shows you the main line, the freight station. This in blue was the storage and transfer building. In green was the Overly Sheet Metal Works before it was moved out to Otterman Street. They had their location right there at one time. Also, their house was there. This was a factory that made canvas gloves. This was a factory that made pianos. And this was a warehouse for vegetables, groceries more or less. And you can see there were railroad tracks coming in from the yard into these various plants because it facilitated shipping. This is 1897 in the railroad yard. This is the older location of the freight station when it was still out in the yard. This is Stokes Street coming in from Otterman Street. This was the old Truxell Foundry. Over here was a lumber company, another lumber company. This eventually became a meat packing company. Right up here was a company called the Ice and Coal Company. And we'll see more of that. That's the Greensburg Ice and Coal Company. They used to have those companies that would sell ice in the summer and coal in the winter. This is an actual photo of that, which is provided by the County Historical Society. And that's what happened when people no longer needed ice and coal. They tore the thing down. This is a great old shot. That's an actual steam. I don't want to call it a shovel, but it's a steam crane run by a steam motor. Here we go to 1915. We see the ice company, coal and ice company still there. This was a lumber company. Armour and Company now has a packing house here. There was one thing I did want to point out. This array of railroad tracks. By 1915, you can see a whole bunch of railroad tracks were coming into the railroad yard. This is a great shot. This is another one of Leroy Smeltzer's. And what this captures for us is the fact that they were bringing cattle in on the railroad, leaving the cattle off where they would be taken to Armour and Company's meat packing house. That's one of my shots. I really like that old building, the transfer and storage building. It sits right beside the old freight station. And you have what was once a beautiful old cobblestone area. The heliport now sits there. This is Depot Street. And you see that big door there? That is literally big enough to drive a train into, and there were once tracks coming into there. They actually could bring railroad tracks in there. This is a woodcut I did of that in the 80s. I really like that building. I've often thought about getting hold of it and using it to convert into studio and working space for artists. This is a shot, it's a etching I did back in the 70s of the railroad yard. This is the old storage and transfer. This is Armour and Company's packing house. This is the company that used to be a piano factory. This little issue here was once a crane that sat. It was a hand-operated crane that sat in the yard there, and we've come full circle. It's just kind of an example of how things change. You know, we've seen pictures of when this freight station was once over here. And in 1901, the storage and transfer building was not even located there yet. This is Depot Street. This is Otterman Street out here. And what we see here is Stokes Street coming in. And at that time, in 1901, Stokes Street was the entrance to Seton Hill, simply because there was no entrance down below for Seton Hill because the tunnel under the railroad tracks had not been put in yet. Okay, we're going to call this to an end. We're under 9 minutes. We're going to say so long this